Banking while black isn't easy in Western nations.
Accused, handcuffed, humiliated. Tonight, 5 Investigate shows us what happened to a young black man in Columbia Heights who was trying to cash his paycheck. Lawyers and advocates say his experience is part of a national phenomenon known as banking while black.
But have you ever heard of a bank kicking out a man only to realize later that he was the boss? This isn't a scene from a novel or a movie. It's the real-life story of Bernard Garrett, whose experiences inspired the film The Banker. Garrett, an African-American entrepreneur, fought against systemic racism and built significant wealth. To fight the deeply rooted racial biases of the time, he placed a white man as the public face of his bank, knowing that many people would refuse to do business with a black-owned bank. However, once the truth came to light, Garrett was removed from his position under government pressure and faced criminal charges. This case raises important questions. What does it reveal about the racial dynamics of that era? And why is it that so few people know about this significant chapter in history? Let's find out. The story begins with Bernard Garrett's pursuit of economic empowerment in an era of rampant racial discrimination. Growing up in Willis, Texas, Bernard Garrett was no stranger to the harsh realities of segregation. Born in 1925, he witnessed firsthand the systemic racism that relegated African Americans to second-class citizenship. His early life was shaped by the stark divide between the opportunities available to white Americans and the limited prospects for black individuals. From a young age, Garrett was determined to break free from these constraints. Garrett's entrepreneurial spirit manifested early. As a child, he ran a shoeshine business and delivered newspapers, quickly realizing that economic power was essential to gaining control over one's destiny. This understanding deepened as he observed the economic disparities in his community. For Garrett, the road to equality was not just about civil rights, but also about economic empowerment. He saw financial success as a means to uplift not only himself, but also his community. Bernard Garrett's early life in Willis was not just shaped by the racial inequalities he saw around him, but also by the close-knit community that supported him. Despite the oppressive environment, Garrett found strength in the solidarity of his community. His parents, though of modest means, were hardworking individuals who instilled in him the values of perseverance and resilience. These values would later drive Garrett to pursue his ambitious goals, despite the numerous obstacles he encountered. The church also played a significant role in shaping Garrett's outlook on life. In the African American community, the church was often a center of social and political life, providing not only spiritual guidance, but also a sense of purpose and hope. Garrett's involvement in his local church exposed him to the idea of collective uplift, the notion that the success of one could be a stepping stone for the success of many. This idea would later influence his decision to extend loans and credit to African Americans once he acquired banks, seeing it as a way to uplift his entire community. When Bernard Garrett moved to Los Angeles in the 1940s, he found a city that, while still marred by racial discrimination, offered more opportunities than the Jim Crow South. Los Angeles was a growing metropolis with a booming economy, and its real estate market was particularly attractive to savvy investors like Garrett. However, the city was also deeply segregated, with African Americans largely confined to certain neighborhoods and denied access to many of the opportunities available to their white counterparts. Garrett's entry into the Los Angeles real estate market was strategic. He began by purchasing small residential properties in African American neighborhoods, but he quickly realized that the real money was in acquiring properties in white neighborhoods where property values were higher and the return on investment was greater. To navigate the racial barriers in the housing market, Garrett employed white intermediaries to purchase properties on his behalf, a tactic that allowed him to bypass the discrimination that would have otherwise prevented him from acquiring these valuable assets. Real estate was more than just a profitable venture for Garrett. It was a stepping stone to achieving his broader vision of economic empowerment. By acquiring property in white neighborhoods, Garrett was not only increasing his wealth, but also challenging the racial status quo. He was demonstrating that African Americans could succeed in areas that had long been considered off-limits to them. Moreover, Garrett's real estate ventures provided him with the financial foundation he needed to pursue even more ambitious goals. The revenue generated from his properties allowed him to invest in other businesses and eventually set his sights on the banking industry, which he saw as the key to unlocking economic opportunities for the Black community. And how did Bernard Garrett manage to acquire banks in a racially exclusive industry? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. The banking industry in the 1960s was not just a financial sector, it was a bastion of white privilege. Banks were the gatekeepers of economic power, controlling access to loans, mortgages, and capital investments. For African Americans, these financial services were often out of reach, as discriminatory practices like redlining and outright denial of service were rampant. Bernard Garrett, aware of the insurmountable barriers they would face if they attempted to purchase banks as Black men, devised a plan that was both audacious and ingenious. He recruited Matt Steiner, a white man with no prior experience in banking, to act as the public face of their operations. Steiner's role was crucial. He was to pose as the buyer of the banks, while Garrett remained behind the scenes as the true owner. This strategy was not without risks. Garrett invested considerable time and resources into training Steiner. He taught him the complexities of banking, finance, and real estate, ensuring that he could convincingly play the role of a seasoned banker. Steiner's ability to navigate the racially exclusive world of American banking was essential to the success of their plan. Their first major target was the First National Bank of Marlin in Texas. Using Steiner as their frontman, Garrett successfully negotiated the purchase of the bank in 1963. This acquisition was groundbreaking. It marked the first time African Americans had successfully purchased a white-owned bank in Texas, a state known for its deeply entrenched racial segregation. Matt Steiner's involvement was not just a tactical decision, it was a necessity born out of the harsh realities of racism in America. Without Steiner, it would have been impossible for Garrett and Morris to even enter the negotiation rooms, let alone secure the purchase of the banks. Steiner's role as the public face of the operation was crucial in a society where a Black man owning a bank was not just improbable, but seen as a direct challenge to the established social order. Steiner, for his part, was more than just a pawn in Garrett's plan. He had to convincingly embody the role of a competent businessman, capable of running a bank. The training he received from Garrett and Morris was intensive, covering everything from financial management to public relations. Steiner had to learn quickly and perform under immense pressure, knowing that any slip-up could expose the entire operation. The acquisition of the First National Bank of Marlin was not without its challenges. Even with Steiner as the frontman, there were moments of suspicion and doubt from the bank's board and the local community. The idea that a young, inexperienced white man with a Black man behind could suddenly acquire a bank was met with skepticism. To allay these doubts, Garrett carefully orchestrated every aspect of the acquisition, ensuring that Steiner was well prepared for any questions or scrutiny he might face. One of the key strategies employed by Garrett was to keep his involvement as secret as possible. They knew that if their identities were revealed too soon, the deal would collapse, and they would face severe repercussions. But what happened after they revealed the real owners? The success of Bernard Garrett in acquiring the First National Bank of Marlin emboldened him to pursue further expansion. Their next target was the Mainland Bank and Trust Company in Texas City, Texas. Once again, they employed Matt Steiner as their frontman, and once again, they succeeded in acquiring the bank without revealing their true identities. With control of two banks, Garrett was in a position to make a significant impact on the economic landscape of Texas, particularly for African Americans. He used the bank's resources to provide financial services to the Black community, challenging the discriminatory practices that had long kept African Americans economically marginalized. However, their growing influence did not go unnoticed. The high-profile nature of their acquisitions, particularly the purchase of the prestigious Bankers Building in downtown Los Angeles, drew attention to their activities. As his financial empire expanded, so did the scrutiny from the white business community and local officials. The turning point came when the true identities of Garrett were uncovered. The revelation that two Black men owned multiple banks and significant real estate assets in Texas and California sent shockwaves through the white business community. The backlash was swift and severe. Garrett, who had once been celebrated for his business acumen, was now seen as a threat to the established racial order. The reaction from the white business community was one of outrage and disbelief. The idea that two black men could outsmart the system and acquire such significant assets was seen as an affront to the established social hierarchy. This was not just a business issue, it was a racial one. The notion that African Americans could own banks and control financial resources was deeply threatening to the white establishment, which had long used economic power as a means of maintaining racial dominance. In Marlin, Texas, where the First National Bank of Marlin was located, the reaction was particularly hostile. When it became known that Garrett, a black man, was the true owner of the bank, local officials and business leaders acted quickly to remove him from power. Garrett was forcibly removed from the bank, an event that underscored the deep-seated racial hostility that permeated American society. The exposure of their identities had a profound impact on both Garrett. What had once been a story of success and ambition quickly turned into one of fear and uncertainty. He was no longer just a businessman. He was now seen as a rebel who had challenged the status quo and was paying the price for it. For Garrett, the personal toll was immense. He had to watch as the empire he had built was dismantled before his eyes. The stress of the legal battles, the loss of his business, and the public scrutiny took a significant toll on his health and well-being. Morris faced similar challenges, as the legal and financial pressures mounted. The public nature of their downfall also had a ripple effect on their families and communities. They had become symbols of what could be achieved through hard work and determination, but their downfall served as a reminder of the systemic barriers that still existed. The sense of betrayal and disappointment was palpable, not just for Garrett, but for all those who had looked up to them as pioneers in the fight for economic justice. In this, what role law played? Following the revelation of their true identities, Bernard Garrett and Joseph Morris, who was also his partner and was also black, found themselves embroiled in a series of legal battles that would ultimately lead to the dismantling of their financial empire. The Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation (FDIC), which had been monitoring their activities, launched an investigation into their banking practices. The investigation focused on allegations of misapplication of bank funds and conspiracy to defraud the government. The legal challenges faced by Garrett and Morris were compounded by the racial dynamics of the time. In a society where the judicial system was often biased against African Americans, they were at a significant disadvantage. The prosecution portrayed them as deceitful and untrustworthy, capitalizing on the racist stereotypes that were prevalent in the 1960s. One of the key charges against Garrett and Morris was the misapplication of bank funds. The prosecution argued that they had used the bank's resources to further their real estate ventures, a practice that was not uncommon among bankers at the time, but was considered illegal when it involved African Americans. The case against them was built on the notion that they had used deceptive practices to acquire the banks and that they had engaged in fraudulent activities to maintain control over their financial empire. Despite their best efforts to defend themselves, Garrett and Morris were convicted on charges of misapplying bank funds and conspiracy to defraud the government. Bernard Garrett was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison, while Joseph Morris received a lighter sentence. The convictions marked the end of their banking ventures and the collapse of their financial empire. The conviction of Garrett and Morris cannot be understood without considering the role of systemic racism. At every step of the legal process, they were treated not as businessmen who had broken the law, but as black men who had dared to challenge the racial order. The prosecution's case was built on the assumption that they had no right to own banks or control financial resources, and this assumption was deeply rooted in the racist attitudes of the time. The media also played a significant role in shaping public perception of the case. Newspapers and television reports often portrayed Garrett and Morris as cunning manipulators who had used their race to gain sympathy and deceive the public. This narrative reinforced the idea that African Americans were inherently untrustworthy and incapable of running complex financial operations. The harsh sentences handed down to Garrett and Morris were a reflection of the racial biases that permeated the legal system. While white bankers who engaged in similar practices often received light sentences or were allowed to settle out of court, Garrett and Morris were made examples of. Their conviction was a clear message to other African Americans. The system would not tolerate any attempts to challenge its authority. The conviction of Garrett and Morris had a profound impact on the African American community. For many, Their downfall was a bitter reminder of the systemic barriers that still existed, even in the wake of the civil rights movement. The message was clear. No matter how successful you are, the system will always find a way to bring you down. The loss of the banks also meant the loss of a crucial financial resource for the Black community. Garrett and Morris had been providing loans and credit to African Americans who had been denied access to these services by mainstream banks. Their conviction meant that these services would once again be out of reach for many in the community. The sense of betrayal was palpable. Garrett and Morris had been seen as pioneers, men who had used their success to uplift others. Their conviction was not just a personal tragedy, it was a setback for the entire community. The hope that had been inspired by their success was now replaced by a deep sense of disillusionment. How has the story of Bernard Garrett and Joseph Morris been remembered, and what lessons can we learn from their experiences?
His job at UNFI, a grocery supplier better known as SuperValue in Hopkins. Closer to home, Morrow stopped here at U.S. Bank in Columbia Heights to cash his paycheck for $900. Despite having an account, that simple transaction was anything but.
They was all looking at me and just staring at me. And then looking at the check, then staring at me again. I'm already knowing what they thinking, the check fake. The manager, he came over and said, "Joe Morrow, your check fake." And I said, "What?" He said, "You people are always coming in here with fake checks."
Who do you think he meant?
Black people.
I work there, bro. And I'm a report to you, bro.
Morrow continued pleading his case with Police Sergeant Justin Pletcher in the room. Morrow's claim of racial profiling immediately met with this warning.
Joe, I need you to calm down, first of all, okay? Don't say anything stupid, because you're just going to get arrested for it, all right?
The story of Bernard Garrett and Joseph Morris is one of ambition, resilience, and the fight against systemic racism. Despite their eventual downfall, their efforts to break into the American banking industry and empower the Black community through financial means have left a lasting legacy. For many years, their story remained largely unknown, overshadowed by the more prominent figures of the civil rights movement. However, in 2020, their story was brought to a wider audience through the film The Banker, which dramatized their rise to prominence and their eventual downfall. Starring Anthony Mackie as Bernard Garrett and Samuel L. Jackson as Joseph Morris, the film highlights their ingenuity, determination, and the challenges they faced as Black entrepreneurs in a racist society. While The Banker takes some creative liberties with the facts, it remains largely faithful to the essence of their story. It serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of economic empowerment in the fight for civil rights and the lengths to which African Americans had to go to overcome the barriers that stood in their way. The legacy of Bernard Garrett and Joseph Morris lives on in the work of contemporary African American entrepreneurs who continue to push the boundaries of what is possible. Their story serves as an inspiration for those who seek to challenge the status quo and create opportunities for themselves and their communities. Today, there are numerous examples of Black entrepreneurs who have followed in their footsteps, building successful businesses and contributing to the economic empowerment of the Black community. These modern-day entrepreneurs benefit from the groundwork laid by pioneers like Garrett and Morris. The financial landscape has changed significantly since the 1960s, with more opportunities available for African Americans to access capital and build wealth. However, the lessons from their story remain relevant, particularly the importance of strategic thinking, resilience, and the pursuit of economic justice. While significant progress has been made since the time of Garrett and Morris, the fight for economic equality is far from over. African Americans continue to face disparities in income, wealth, and access to capital. The racial wealth gap remains a persistent issue, with Black households holding significantly less wealth than their white counterparts. This gap is the result of centuries of systemic racism, including the discriminatory practices that Garrett and Morris sought to overcome. Their story reminds us that the fight for economic justice is ongoing and that there is still much work to be done. It also highlights the importance of continuing to support Black-owned businesses and financial institutions, which play a crucial role in addressing these disparities and creating opportunities for future generations. Do you think racism can ever end in the West? Why is this still going on? Why does the West, which always talks about human rights, practice it within its borders? Let us know in the comments section. Do you think anything has gotten better for Black people? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.